I never thought a Tuesday afternoon at my lake cabin could feel like the calm before a hurricane, but that was before Karen arrived. And when I say Karen, I mean HOA Karen, the woman who treats her clipboard like a scepter and every petty rule like the law of the land. She had that look in her eyes, the one that says, "I am about to ruin your life, and I'll do it with a smile." The sun was dipping toward the horizon, the water glinting like scattered diamonds. My boat bobbed gently at the dock, gleaming in the light. It was mine, my escape, my little sanctuary from the world. And yet there she was, marching toward it with the precision of a drill sergeant. The clipboard shook in her hand like she was wielding some kind of weapon, and her heels clicked against the wood like a metronome counting down the seconds to my doom. I smiled politely as she approached, though inside I was already cooking up a plan. Karen didn't know it yet, but this little boat, my pride and joy, had been transformed into something of a trap. Not dangerous, mind you, just cleverly inconvenient. The kind of inconvenience that makes even the most self-righteous HOA president squirm. Yes, you, she barked before she even got close. Your boat is too far from the dock. That's a violation, a hazard, a danger to, well, everything. She waved her clipboard like a sword. I had to bite my tongue to stop from laughing. Hazard, please. The only hazard here was Karen herself, wobbling like a flamingo on stilts as she glared at my perfectly moored boat. I leaned against the railing casually, coffee in hand, pretending to be utterly uninterested. Inside, my mind was racing. Every rope tied, every plank under the boat, every little mechanism I had rigged was waiting for her to make a move. She had no idea. She honestly believed she had the upper hand, and that, my friends, is the best kind of confidence to play with. Karen stepped closer, peering at the ropes and the hull. "Did you even check the HOA guidelines before putting this boat here?" she demanded, her voice tight and precise, like a drumbeat of fury. "Because I swear I will not." Her tirade went on, but all I could focus on was her hands fidgeting with the rope, her tiny panic growing as she tried to look in control. I let her rage fill the air, let it swirl around us like a storm gathering strength. I smiled, the kind of smile that says, "I know something you don't," because I did. Every inch of that dock, every rope, every inch of my boat had been carefully prepared. She had stepped into my world without realizing it, and soon she would learn that even the smallest misstep could trigger chaos. Then she reached the edge of the dock and paused, probably trying to convince herself she was in charge. She tapped the boat lightly. It rocked just a hair. I pretended to check my watch, sipping my coffee, letting her think she had control. Every second was pure suspense. Would she pull too hard, step the wrong way? That tiny wobble could start a chain reaction, and she had no clue. I heard her muttering something about calling the HOA board, about reporting me for endangering the community. Funny, I thought. Community. She had no idea that in a few minutes it would be her who might be at risk of a minor, but highly entertaining disaster. I leaned back, trying to look completely relaxed, though my pulse was racing. There's a thrill in watching someone so sure of themselves slowly realize they're walking blind into your little plan. And then she stepped onto the dock fully, her clipboard raised like a shield. Her eyes flicked to me, daring me to say something. I just raised an eyebrow and took another sip of coffee. She had no idea how close she was to losing that illusion of control. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the trees and sending tiny ripples across the water. I could feel it building, the tension hanging heavy in the air, waiting to snap. Karen was so focused on rules, on authority, on her righteous indignation, that she didn't notice the subtle signs around her. Every creak, every shift, every small movement of my boat was a warning she would ignore at her own peril. And right at that moment, as she squared her shoulders and gave me a glare that could curdle milk, I realized this was going to be one of those afternoons that no one would forget. Karen had no idea she had just stepped into the calm before the storm, and when the storm hit, it would be spectacular. I watched her, heart racing, grinning just enough to hide the anticipation, and I thought to myself, let's see how far that confidence will take her. Karen didn't waste a second. She strutted toward the boat like she owned the lake itself, her clipboard clutched tightly, a scowl cemented on her face. I could see her plotting already, how she'd take control of my little boat, enforce her rules, and then march back to the HOA office with a hero's tale about defeating the unruly homeowner. She bent over the edge of the dock, peering at the ropes, muttering, "This is unacceptable, absolutely unacceptable." Her voice was loud enough that I could hear her over the gentle lapping of water against the hull. And in that moment, I realized something amazing. She genuinely believed she had the upper hand. Her confidence made me grin. "Need a hand?" I asked casually, leaning on the railing. I could feel my pulse picking up, every nerve alert. She glanced at me as if I had suggested sacrilege. "No, thank you, I've got this," she snapped a bit too sharply. The little wiggle of her foot as she shifted weight betrayed her nerves. I stayed still, coffee in hand, pretending to check the horizon. My plan was simple: let her overconfidence do the work. I had rigged the boat carefully. One wrong step, one misplaced tug, and the chain reaction would begin. It wasn't dangerous, but it would be messy, chaotic, and most importantly, humiliating in a way only HOA Karen could experience. She grabbed the rope and began to untie it, her fingers fumbling slightly. I tried to suppress a chuckle. "Careful there," I said, voice light, as if offering friendly advice. She shot me a glare that could melt steel, muttering, "I don't need your advice." I nodded as if I hadn't just reminded her of the precarious setup I had painstakingly arranged. The suspense was almost unbearable. Every second felt stretched, like watching a thriller in slow motion. She shifted her weight, leaned too far over the dock, tugged the rope too sharply, and the boat rocked ever so slightly. A tiny creak echoed from the hull, just enough to raise my heart rate and make me aware that the trap was alive, waiting. Then came the moment of pure absurdity. Karen, in her righteous fury, tried to straighten the boat, stepping gingerly onto the dock with one hand still clutching the rope. Her clipboard jutted out like a shield as she muttered threats about HOA penalties and fines. I could practically hear her internal monologue: "I am in control. I am the law. I will prevail." Except she was not even close. I watched as the chain of events quietly began. A small splash, a subtle tilt, nothing dramatic yet, just enough to unnerve her. She froze, eyes widening as if she had just noticed gravity itself might betray her. I leaned back, pretending to be calm, the corners of my mouth twitching with barely contained amusement. "You might want to slow down," I suggested again, casually, almost lazily. She shot me a look that could have withered a tree. "I said I've got this," she snapped. Yet even as she said it, her hand slipped slightly on the rope. That's all it took. One misstep, one fumble, and the trap would be activated fully. A small ripple of water lapped against the dock, the sun glinting off the boat's hull. I could see the tension radiating from her in waves, each breath slightly too sharp, each gesture slightly too frantic. Her confidence was cracking, and she didn't even know it. At this point, I could barely keep my own excitement contained. This wasn't about revenge. It was about poetic justice. A woman who spent her life obsessed with rules was about to have a tiny, harmless lesson in humility. I sipped my coffee slowly, savoring the suspense as she continued to wrestle with the boat. Then came the pivotal moment. She leaned too far, the rope slipping just enough to trigger the first stage of the chaos I had carefully designed. A subtle, almost imperceptible snap, a shiver through the boat, and I saw it, the tiniest flicker of panic crossing her face. She froze, eyes wide, voice trembling slightly, trying to regain control. And that's when I realized the truth. HOA Karen had no idea what she had just walked into. No idea at all. I leaned back on the railing, my grin spreading, enjoying the tension, savoring every second. The suspense was building, and I could feel it in my chest like electricity. She had taken the bait. And if the universe had a sense of humor, the next few minutes were going to be unforgettable. I took one last sip of my coffee, watching her struggle, and thought, here we go. Let's see how deep the rabbit hole goes. I had been holding my breath, waiting for the moment when Karen's confidence would meet reality, and then it happened. The boat shifted just a fraction, so small that she barely noticed, but that tiny movement was all it took. A subtle creak, a splash against the dock, and the first domino in my little trap fell. Karen's eyes widened, a flicker of panic breaking through her carefully constructed poise. She stumbled slightly, clutching the rope as if it were a lifeline, her clipboard teetering dangerously in her other hand. I tried to stay casual, leaning against the railing with the same relaxed posture I'd maintained all afternoon, but inside my heart was pounding like a drum solo. What is happening?" she gasped, stepping back, her voice rising with every word. I couldn't help but smile inwardly. Exactly, I thought. Exactly the reaction I was hoping for. The boat rocked again, a little harder this time, and her panic escalated. She tried to stabilize it, leaning over with one hand on the dock and one on the hull, but each movement only made the wobble worse. Her face went from fury to confusion to pure terror in the span of 3 seconds. I swear I could almost see the gears in her brain grinding. I am HOA Karen. I am invincible. Why is this boat betraying me? I leaned forward slightly, pretending to inspect my dock. Careful there, I said lightly, the kind of voice that implies nothing while meaning everything. She shot me a glare so intense it could have melted my coffee mug. I do not need your help, she snapped, slipping slightly again. Her clipboard nearly fell into the water, and she flailed to catch it. The chaos had officially begun. And then it got worse. One of the ropes I had subtly loosened earlier shifted completely, tilting the boat further toward the edge of the dock. Karen screamed, a high-pitched, squeaky little sound that echoed across the lake. I had never heard anyone scream like that without actual danger involved, and yet here she was, teetering on the fine line between indignation and total chaos. I could hear the faint slap of water against the dock and the boat's hull scraping slightly as it rocked. Her foot slipped again, and this time I had to physically bite my tongue to stop laughing. She was the perfect mix of furious and flustered, and the suspense was unbearable, not just for her, but for me, too. Every second stretched like taffy, each movement carrying the potential to escalate the situation even further. She spun, trying to call for help. Someone, anyone, this is a disaster, she yelled, waving her arms like a person trying to stop a runaway train. I could see the neighbors peeking through their windows, curious murmurs floating across the air, but none of them knew what had been rigged. Only I did, and that knowledge felt like a secret superpower. Her flailing became almost cartoonish. One hand clutched the rope, the other tried to grab the dock railing, and her clipboard swung wildly like a pendulum. I watched, my pulse racing, as the trap did exactly what I had planned. The boat teetered, rocked, and even let out a tiny splash onto the dock, soaking the edges of her shoes. Her eyes went wide, the color draining from her face as she realized she was no longer in control. And then it hit me. This wasn't just about the boat. It was about every little rule she had ever tried to enforce, every absurd fine, every emergency HOA meeting she had summoned me to. All of that combined into this single, chaotic moment where she realized that her authority could be undermined by a boat. I could see the panic turning to desperation. She tried to step back, tripping slightly, grabbing at the dock railing, only to cause the boat to tilt further. Water splashed onto the wood and her shoes were soaked. I had to swallow a laugh as she waved her arms helplessly. Every movement she made escalated the chaos, perfect timing. Neighbors started whispering now, curious about the commotion. Karen spun toward them, trying to maintain dignity, but her expression betrayed her. She was trapped in her own little storm, a victim of her overconfidence, and I could feel the suspense tightening in the air like a drawn bow. I sipped my coffee slowly, enjoying every second of it, narrating silently to myself. This is the moment. She has no idea how deep the rabbit hole goes. One more misstep and it's full-blown chaos. And then she stepped too far, shifting her weight just enough. The boat tipped slightly more, a louder splash hitting the dock. Karen shrieked, the sound cutting across the lake like a warning. The trap was fully alive now, the suspense reaching its peak. I leaned back, smiling calmly, knowing that the next moments were going to be unforgettable, for her, for me, and for anyone lucky enough to witness the chaos. By now, the entire dock was alive with chaos. Water was splashing over the edges, soaking Karen's perfectly pressed clothes, her heels slipping dangerously on the wet wood. She flailed like a marionette with its strings cut, arms windmilling, clipboard swinging, hair plastered to her face. And all I could do was watch, my heart pounding with a mix of excitement and disbelief at the perfect storm I had orchestrated. I leaned against the railing, coffee still in hand, trying to appear casual. Maybe take it slow, I suggested, voice calm as if I were giving friendly advice to a toddler learning to walk. She shot me a look that could have frozen lava, and I fought the urge to grin. The suspense was thick, every second stretching like elastic. She tried to regain control of the boat, grabbing ropes in both hands, tugging and pulling. But the trap was clever. It wasn't just about tipping or wobbling. No, it had little surprises, subtle shifts that made every movement she made backfire spectacularly. One tug caused the dock to squeak and creak under her weight. A second misstep made the boat tilt further, sloshing water onto her clipboard and shoes. She screamed, a high-pitched, escalating squeal, and I could feel the tension on the dock spike like electricity in the air. The neighbors had started gathering, peeking over fences, whispering in shocked tones. I could hear snippets of conversation. What is she doing? Is she okay? Why is she screaming? Perfect. They had no idea the chaos wasn't random. It was entirely orchestrated. I sipped my coffee slowly, savoring the suspense and the growing absurdity of the situation. Karen's confidence, once so imposing, was crumbling faster than I could have hoped. She stepped back to regain her footing and promptly slipped on the wet edge of the dock. Her arms flailed and she toppled slightly forward, splashing water over the already soaked edges of the boat. The momentum caused the boat to rock even more violently. She shrieked again, and I had to press my hand to my mouth to stop myself from laughing. The suspense was perfect, tense, chaotic, and absolutely hilarious all at once. "Someone call the HOA?" she yelled, her voice cracking with panic. But even as she spoke, her words were drowned out by the splashes, the squeaks of the dock, and the furious thrashing of the boat. I could almost see her internal monologue racing. "I am HOA Karen. I enforce the rules. Why is the world conspiring against me?" At this point, the trap had fully taken over. Every attempt she made to control the boat only made it wobble more, sending arcs of water over the dock and splashing unsuspecting toes. Her clipboard slipped from her grip entirely and landed in the water with a pitiful plop. I watched, barely containing my grin, as she lunged for it and ended up losing her balance again. One neighbor finally stepped forward, cautiously trying to help. Karen grabbed them, pulling them into the madness. "No, don't touch it, don't!" she yelled, dragging the poor soul into her personal storm. The tension was thick, and the suspense was so high I could feel it in my chest. Every second counted. Every twitch of the boat, every frantic step she took, brought her closer to the full impact of my little plan. And just when I thought it couldn't get any more chaotic, the final piece of the trap activated. A small rope snapped, sending the boat tipping sharply to one side. Karen shrieked and tried to catch it, her body swaying dangerously over the dock. Water splashed higher this time, soaking her hair, her jacket, and everything she had worked so hard to keep pristine. I could barely breathe through the suspense, watching the perfect orchestration of chaos unfold. For a few terrifyingly long seconds, it seemed like she might regain control. But her balance was gone, her authority evaporated, and the trap had claimed her entirely. The neighbors were wide-eyed, some trying not to laugh, others just staring in disbelief. And Karen was at the center of the storm, soaked, humiliated, and utterly powerless. I finally allowed myself to lean back, letting the suspense ease just slightly. But only slightly. I knew this was far from over. Karen might have survived the first wave, but the real lesson, the one she wouldn't forget, was just about to hit. The boat, the dock, the water, and her pride were all lined up perfectly. And as I watched her flailing, drenched, and screaming, I couldn't help but think, this is going to be one for the HOA history books. By now, the entire lakefront was buzzing. Karen's screams had carried over the water, drawing every curious neighbor like moths to a flame. I could hear whispers, some shocked, some trying not to laugh, and I had to fight a smile as I watched her flounder, soaked from head to toe, holding on for dear life. Then came the sound that made my pulse spike. The HOA was arriving. Yes, the cavalry of clipboard-wielding, badge-brandishing enforcers of petty rules. I could hear their footsteps crunching over gravel, voices calling out orders and explanations that made no sense. Karen's panic escalated immediately. She saw them, and for a second, relief flickered across her face, but it was fleeting. "I've got this under control," she yelled, water dripping from her sleeves, hair plastered to her forehead. "It's all fine." The statement was laughable. We both knew it wasn't fine, not even close. The HOA members arrived like a squadron of bureaucratic warriors, each one trying to assert authority while making themselves look important. One of them held a giant laminated rule sheet. Another had a radio that seemed completely unnecessary. A third carried a tiny first aid kit, as if the day's chaos might require stitches. I watched them, amused, as they cautiously approached the dock, eyes darting between the boat and Karen, confusion written across their faces. Karen flailed wildly, trying to explain the situation while simultaneously trying to stabilize the boat. It's out of control," she shouted. The HOA members leaned in, squinting, whispering to each other. "What is happening?" one of them asked, tilting his head like a confused puppy. "Perfect. Exactly what I wanted. Total chaos." I stayed on the railing, acting casual, coffee in hand, narrating silently in my head. Watch closely. This is why overconfidence is dangerous. Karen's authority evaporated under their bewildered stares, and I could see the tiny cracks forming in her confidence. Every flailing motion, every desperate tug at the boat, every wet, panicked step she took made her look more ridiculous, and the suspense grew thicker with every second. One of the neighbors finally spoke up. Maybe we should call the fire department?" The suggestion made Karen shriek even louder, pointing at the boat like it had betrayed her personally. "No, the HOA will handle this," she barked, though even she sounded uncertain now. I could practically hear her brain working overtime, trying to regain control in a situation that had completely slipped through her grasp. The boat rocked again, tipping slightly, and water sloshed onto the dock. Karen tried to grab a rope, slipping slightly, and ended up soaking one of the HOA members in the process. The man jumped back with a yelp, nearly falling himself. I had to press my hand to my mouth to stop myself from laughing. The suspense was at a fever pitch. Everyone on the dock was teetering on the edge of chaos, and I could feel it like static in the air. Karen's face was the perfect mix of horror, frustration, and disbelief. She sputtered, trying to explain, but every word was drowned out by splashes and the squeaks of the boat rocking against the dock. I leaned back, pretending to casually sip my coffee, savoring every second of the escalating drama. Patience, I reminded myself. The best part hasn't even happened yet. She finally tried to step out of the water, soaked and humiliated, only to slip on the wet dock again. One of the HOA members lunged to catch her, and somehow in the confusion, both of them ended up almost in the water. Another neighbor shrieked, and I thought I might die laughing at the perfect storm of chaos I had orchestrated. And yet through it all, Karen kept trying to assert control. "Stand back! I know what I'm doing!" she yelled, waving a dripping arm at the HOA members. The suspense wasn't just in the boat or the trap anymore. It was in her desperate attempts to maintain authority while the world around her spiraled out of control. I could feel the tension tightening in the air like a drawn bowstring. Every movement she made threatened to escalate the situation further. Every flail, every misstep, every wet, terrified glance toward the neighbors made the suspense unbearable, but also utterly irresistible to anyone watching. I took one last sip of my coffee and muttered under my breath, smiling, "This is it. The storm is fully here, and she has no idea how much worse it can get." By now, the dock was pure chaos. Water was splashing everywhere, Karen was soaked head to toe, and the HOA crew looked like they had just walked into a war zone they weren't prepared for. Every step they took made the boat wobble more, and every wobble sent Karen flailing like a fish out of water. I had to bite my tongue constantly to keep from laughing out loud. The suspense was almost unbearable. Karen's face was a mix of fury and terror, and her words tumbled over each other in a desperate attempt to regain control. "Step back, I can handle this, just stand back," she yelled, but the HOA members weren't listening, or maybe they were too shocked to respond. One of them tried to grab the rope, only to slip slightly and flail, almost tipping himself into the lake. I leaned back against my railing, sipping my coffee, reveling in the perfect storm I had set into motion. The neighbors had now gathered, whispering and pointing. A few of them tried to hide their laughter, but the sheer absurdity of the situation made it impossible. There was Karen, soaked, yelling, waving her arms, and trying to control a boat that had decided it was having none of it. And I was calm, composed, and savoring every second of her escalating panic. Karen lunged for the boat, gripping a rope with both hands, trying to steady it. The water sloshed higher, soaking her hair and the edge of her clipboard. She lost her footing again, her heels sliding on the wet wood. She squealed, and I could hear her cursing under her breath, muttering about fines, HOA rules, and this ridiculous property owner. Each word, each flail, made the suspense spike even higher. One of the HOA members finally stepped forward cautiously, trying to assert some control. "Ma'am, maybe we should just—" he began, but Karen cut him off with a shriek. I said I've got this. Do you even know the rules? She yelled, her voice cracking. He froze, unsure whether to help step back or just let the chaos continue. The suspense was tangible. You could almost reach out and grab it. And then came the pivotal moment, the trap fully activated. A subtle tug on the rope sent the boat tilting sharply to one side. Karen shrieked again, losing her balance completely. She stumbled, flailing, and almost toppled entirely into the lake. One of the HOA members lunged to save her, grabbing her just in time, but in doing so they caused the boat to wobble even more violently. Water splashed onto the dock, soaking everyone nearby. The neighbors erupted into whispers and muffled laughter. I could hear someone muttering, "I cannot believe this is happening," while another said, "Did she really just fall for that?" The suspense had everyone on edge, wondering what would happen next. Karen's hair was plastered to her face, her jacket soaked through, and her heels completely ruined. And yet she kept trying to assert authority, waving her arms and shouting over the chaos. "Everyone back! I'm in charge here! Step away from the boat!" she bellowed. The irony was delicious. I stayed calm, narrating silently in my head. This is why overconfidence is dangerous. This is why assumptions are risky. This is why you don't mess with a man's boat. Each movement Karen made seemed to escalate the suspense even further, as if the universe itself had conspired to make this moment unforgettable. Then a neighbor, bold, curious, maybe just entertained, leaned over the railing to peek closer at the boat. Karen shrieked, flailing wildly to protect her territory, and nearly sent both herself and the neighbor into the water. The HOA members scrambled, trying to maintain order, but the more they moved, the more chaos ensued. For a brief moment, time slowed. The boat teetered, water splashed higher, Karen waved her arms desperately, and the HOA members froze in confusion. Everyone was holding their breath. The suspense was at its peak. One wrong step, one miscalculation, and the disaster could get even bigger. I took a slow sip of coffee, my heart racing, knowing I was watching the perfect combination of drama, humor, and chaos unfold. Karen had no idea how thoroughly she had stepped into my little trap. And as I watched her struggle, soaked and frantic, I realized something. The best part wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. This storm wasn't finished, and when it hit its peak, it was going to be legendary. By now, the chaos had reached a fever pitch. The lake was calm, but the dock was anything but. Water splashed over the edges, Karen was soaked from head to toe, and the HOA members were frozen in shock, unsure whether to help or just stay out of the way. And I was calm, cool, and savoring every second, because the climax, the moment everything tipped, was right in front of me. Karen's face was a mix of fury, panic, and sheer disbelief. Her carefully maintained authority had evaporated entirely, replaced by desperate flailing. She yanked at the ropes with both hands, trying to steady the boat, but every movement made it wobble more. Her clipboard had fallen into the water earlier, leaving her helpless, and her heels were completely ruined. She was the perfect storm of humiliation. I could see her internal monologue racing. "I am HOA Karen. I enforce rules. I am invincible. This boat cannot beat me." The problem was it already had. The trap was fully engaged, every subtle mechanism I had rigged now working in perfect harmony. The suspense was unbearable, not just for her, but for anyone watching. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. One small slip of her foot sent the boat tilting sharply. Water splashed onto the dock and over her sleeves, drenching the HOA members who were foolish enough to try to help. She screamed, a high-pitched, panicked sound that echoed across the lake. The neighbors, who had been watching in growing disbelief, gasped and whispered excitedly. Karen lunged to grab the dock railing, but the tilt of the boat made it impossible to stabilize. She swayed dangerously, her balance gone entirely. One of the HOA members lunged to catch her, but their combined weight only made the boat tip further. Water splashed everywhere, drenching shoes, pants, and even a couple of innocent spectators. The suspense was unbearable, every second stretching endlessly. She tried to regain her footing, but the boat had other plans. It wobbled violently, sending arcs of water flying. Karen shrieked again, arms flailing, her hair plastered to her face, soaked through. Every move she made only escalated the chaos. I leaned back against the railing, pretending to sip my coffee, but inside my pulse was racing. This was exactly what I had planned, total glorious chaos. The neighbors were now fully invested, some hiding laughter, some wide-eyed in shock. Karen's desperate attempts to assert control were futile. "I am in charge here," she yelled, her voice cracking. "Step back, don't touch the boat." The irony was perfect. She had no control at all, and everyone could see it. And then it happened, the final domino fell. The boat tipped sharply enough that Karen lost her footing entirely. She flailed, grabbed at the railing, and then splash, ended up partially in the water. The HOA members scrambled, trying to help, but ended up getting soaked themselves. The neighbors erupted into gasps and suppressed laughter, some clapping their hands like it was a theatrical performance. I could feel the suspense finally release like a drawn bowstring letting go. The trap had worked perfectly, the chaos was complete, and Karen's authority had been obliterated. Water streamed from her hair and jacket, her expression a mix of horror and disbelief. She sputtered, coughing and shaking as if trying to process what had just happened. I finally allowed myself to laugh quietly, leaning back, coffee in hand. "Need a hand?" I asked, voice calm as if nothing had occurred. Karen looked at me like I had grown a second head. You did this," she sputtered, dripping wet and utterly humiliated. I shrugged casually. "What? I just watched." The HOA members were still trying to regain their composure, whispering to each other and helping her back to the dock. Karen's dignity had been completely soaked away, literally and figuratively. The neighbors were whispering and chuckling, clearly entertained by the spectacle. The suspense that had gripped everyone for the last hour had finally peaked, and the payoff was glorious. As I leaned back on my railing, taking in the aftermath, I realized something important. This wasn't just about a boat or an HOA. It was about confidence, overconfidence, and the chaos that follows when you underestimate someone or something. Karen had walked into my little trap thinking she was in control. And now? Well, she had learned a lesson she would never forget. I sipped my coffee one last time, watching her sputter and glare, and smiled to myself. The storm had passed. The boat floated calmly once again as if nothing had happened. But the memory of that afternoon, the suspense, the chaos, and Karen's complete humiliation would linger far longer. Sometimes the best victories are the ones served with a little patience, a lot of planning, and just enough chaos. The dock was quiet now, except for the occasional drip of water from Karen's soaked jacket and the gentle lapping of the lake against the hull of my boat. The storm, the chaos, the shouting, the flailing was finally over. And yet, the tension that had gripped everyone lingered like the last notes of a dramatic symphony. Karen sat on the edge of the dock, hair plastered to her face, shoes ruined, and dignity completely drenched. The HOA members hovered nearby, muttering apologies and explanations, clearly unsure how to handle a situation that had spun so wildly out of control. I leaned against the railing, coffee in hand, pretending to check my watch, though inside I was still buzzing with adrenaline. You think this is funny?" Karen sputtered, her voice cracking. She had finally realized that her authority, which she wielded like a sword, had been completely nullified. The boat had done exactly what I had hoped. It had humbled her, embarrassed her, and taught her a lesson in patience and overconfidence. I just watched," I said, voice calm, almost casual, as if nothing extraordinary had just occurred. She glared at me, dripping and furious, trying to maintain a shred of control, but there was none left. Every eye on the dock could see it. Every neighbor who had witnessed the spectacle knew it. Karen had lost, and spectacularly. The neighbors were whispering excitedly now, some trying not to laugh, others openly grinning. I caught snippets of conversation. Did she really fall in? And I can't believe the HOA president got soaked. Perfect. The suspense of the previous hours had paid off beautifully. Everyone had been on edge, wondering what would happen next, and now they were laughing, quietly, discreetly, and in some cases uncontrollably. Karen tried to get up, shaking her wet hair out of her eyes, but the dock was slippery and she stumbled slightly. One of the HOA members rushed to steady her and she swatted their hand away. "I've got this," she insisted, though her soaked appearance contradicted her words. I smiled to myself. "No, Karen, no, you don't." I took a slow sip of coffee, letting the calm of the lake sink in. My boat floated peacefully, bobbing gently in the water, completely innocuous now. The trap had done its work. The chaos was over, the suspense had reached its peak, and the lesson had been delivered. Finally, she muttered something about filing complaints, calling meetings, and reporting me to the HOA board. I raised an eyebrow. "Go ahead," I said lightly. "I think they'll want the story firsthand." She sputtered, water dripping from her face, too flustered to respond. The absurdity of it all was perfect. She had spent so long building her authority, enforcing rules, and maintaining her image, and now all she could do was sputter and fume. The neighbors started to disperse, shaking their heads, whispering about what they had just witnessed. One of them even gave me a thumbs up, clearly impressed. The suspense, the humor, and the chaos had all been worth it. Every misstep, every splash, every frantic yell from Karen had contributed to the perfect payoff. Karen finally managed to pull herself together, though still dripping and humiliated. She glared at me one last time, muttering threats under her breath about fines, violations, and next time. I just smiled. Let her stew. She had learned more today than any HOA manual could teach her. Patience, humility, and perhaps the simple fact that overconfidence can lead to spectacular failure. I stepped closer to the dock, helping her regain her footing, though I did it slowly, savoring the moment. "All good?" I asked, voice calm, almost teasing. She shot me a look that could have burned holes through the wood, muttered something unintelligible, and stormed off toward her car. The HOA members followed, muttering amongst themselves, clearly trying to salvage what little dignity remained. I sat back on my dock, finally letting out a long, satisfied breath. The sun reflected off the water, sparkling like nothing had happened. My boat floated peacefully, innocent-looking but victorious. And as I watched Karen drive away, soaked, defeated, and humiliated, I realized one thing: petty HOA wars could be brutal, yes. But a little cleverness, patience, and planning could turn the tables spectacularly. I raised my coffee in a silent toast to the perfect afternoon. Chaos orchestrated, suspense maintained, and justice served. Sometimes the best victories aren't loud or violent. They're soaked, ridiculous, and unforgettable. And today I had one in style. Sometimes the lake is calm. Sometimes the storm hits. But the best part? You get to watch it all unfold from the perfect vantage point. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.